Welcome to our channel Scary Sagas, where we bring you the most amazing true horror stories. Today, we have bone-chilling stories that will make your blood run cold. These stories are based on real events and have been passed down among the people. Are you ready to hear the ghastly ghosts and demonic spirits that still roam the deserted halls and corridors? Losing a loved one is the worst thing that can happen. Everyone is aware of that. When I lost the love of my life more than 20 years ago, this fact became all too true for me. We were childhood sweethearts who eventually were married when we were both 21 years old. But I lost him in a motorcycle accident when we were on our honeymoon. I felt bad for having survived. I'd always been terrified of ghost stories, and after he died, I became much more so. I tried to make sure I was never alone. The thought of meeting his ghost was simply too much for me, even though I would have wanted to see him again. My family brought me to a log cabin in the woods. My spouse would have liked it because he loved the outdoors. Even though my parents attempted to include me and made a barbecue, all I wanted to do was sleep to escape the sadness. One early morning, I panicked because I thought someone was watching me. I made the decision to get up and go for a solo stroll in the woods. I was in a dreamy frame of mind after seeing the mist, so I continued to roam. I made an effort to block off thoughts of my spouse and the sensation that awoke me. But as I got closer to the peak of the first hill, it returned. I remained frozen and simply stared about, unsure of what to do. Farther up the trail, I spotted the spectral figure of a woman wearing a scarlet dress, which made my hair stand on end and my blood freeze. When I saw that her garment was covered in blood, I gasped. Blood had been detected, but I attributed it to being in the woods. She continued to keep her head lowered as the blood began to spill out into the surrounding ground, and her long, black hair appeared to meld into the garment. I could hear mournful sighs and soft tears. She drifted toward me with each step I made as I started to walk backward slowly. My body trembled in panic while my thoughts tried to come up with a plan of action. The woman gently raised her head from under the thick hair covering her face. She was crying, her crimson lips shaking, and I could see her big, dark eyes looking at me. I noticed that her hands were smeared in blood as she raised them to her chest to clasp them. She was ahead of me when I turned and started to race down the hill. But I skidded to a stop when I spotted her. She had zipped to that spot in an instant. It made no difference where I went as I dashed out towards the forest. She kept coming in quick succession, wailing, crying, and clutching her blood-stained hands to her chest as she inched closer and closer. I thought I was confined. She materialized in front of me as I ran away once more, now reaching out to embrace me in a gruesome embrace. I screamed as I was pressed against her by her cold, wet body, felt blood pouring into my own garments, and smelled death all around me. She was inches from me and had a horrible face. "What do you want?" I shouted. "Let me out, please." I exerted all of my strength to get away from her. When I gasped for breath in icy bursts of air, she peered into my eyes and froze them. She communicated to me telepathically since I didn't notice her lips moving other than to tremble. "If you let him in, I let you leave." She leaned forward and gave my cheek an icy, bleeding kiss. I thought a bit more since I somehow understood what she meant before realizing that the only way I could leave her was to comply. "All right, please let me go." She disappeared in an instant, and I assumed I was left alone. When I turned back, there he was, smiling and holding out his arms, encircled by a golden halo. When I rushed to him, I felt his arms around me. I sobbed into his chest and said, "How is this even possible?" He said, "I wanted to say goodbye," as he touched my hair. She connected us by sharing her personal sorrow. He spoke a lengthy goodbye before departing, but I observed the woman smiling despite her own anguish. She slowly began to back away, just like she had done when she had come closer before. While she was able to give us what she had wished for, just one more moment with a loved one who had passed away, I received the strong impression that she was still incredibly unhappy. I was at my lowest point ever after my divorce and felt the need for seclusion and contemplation more than before. Because she lacked the money to take a vacation, a co-worker kindly provided her with a stone cottage in the woods. It was only a 2-hour drive away, and I really thanked her for the chance to go away. She popped by to give me the keys before I left. She seemed rather apprehensive when she handed them over, which startled me. As I asked her if she was all right, she turned around and climbed into her car while pouting as if she were torn. "We haven't been there for 3 years, something I should have mentioned to you before. That could need a little cleaning up." At her, I chuckled and shook my head. "Don't worry about it. It's not a big problem." She kept glancing at me. "There is another thing." When she drew nearer to me, she shut the car door. "Some claim it's haunted." The statement's absurdity made me laugh out loud. "Go ahead. I don't believe in that crap. As you well know, I'll be all right." I didn't see that she was trembling with dread. After giving my friend a hug, I thought about how stupid my friend was and concluded that the cottage was probably just old. I took a week off work to take advantage of my welcome vacation, and I arrived at the property at 5 o'clock on a Saturday night. When I approached the location on the gravel road, I saw that it was tucked among the woods and had a storage building at the rear. The peculiar fog that had been present surrounding the property but not elsewhere on my journey up the mountain caught my attention as well. I left my car in front of the cottage and gawked at the masonry that had been created using stones from the local river. Old-fashioned beauty was provided by the wooden door and shutters, and the roof's charming shingles completed the appearance. I was shocked to see how little furniture there was as I unlocked the front door and flung it open wide. I pulled my luggage in and set up, since I was equally shocked that the mess my body had indicated was non-existent. I enjoyed that my divorce-related sadness had subsided, so I did take a quick lunch and went to bed. It took me some time to notice that this place was devoid of the typical noises of the woods. I was lying in bed when I heard light footsteps coming from the main room. I pondered why it was so silent. Then, as the footfall increased in number and speeded up, I noticed that black shadows were moving into position under the door's crack. I stood up and observed the sputtering shadows that appeared to be black fire coming from the other room. Louder footsteps were heard. I got out of bed and started walking toward the door, but I stopped when it started opening on its own very slowly. The door's creaking nearly injured my eardrums, as chilling air swept up around me. I was perplexed to hear the footsteps yet be able to see the entire room. I later discovered they were coming from the ceiling. Unseen hands that felt more like claws suddenly propelled me onward. When I staggered into the main area, I yelled, just in time to see the bedroom door slam shut. I swiftly turned around, and the demon's laughter paralyzed me. A big hand grabbed me by the hair and stopped me from lunging for the front door. I then sprang up into the air. My head was seared with anguish as I struggled to locate my feet while shrieking in horror and hanging in midair. As I dangled in the air, I shouted, "Let me go." Then I was violently flung across the room. I stumbled over a chair after landing there and felt something pierce my skin. I still can't believe that the dark, flickering flames turned out to be several devils. Although it pains me to refer to them as devils, I have no other way to put them into words. They had crimson, malevolent eyes as well. In a fit of wrath, I exclaimed, "What do you want?" One of the larger demons shouted loudly and flew straight up to my face. I initially misunderstood what it was saying, since the foul smell and freezing cold blasts emanating from its lips were so distracting. When it turned into a searing frost straight from hell, the cold I had been feeling was actually fire that had gotten so hot. I attempted to stand up, but the strong claws knocked me back down. I shouted my query once more, this time louder. As I heard the slow response, "Blood and soul," I almost passed out. When I spun around and screamed in utter panic, I swiftly crawled toward the direction of the front door. My ankles were being grazed by several claws, but I disregarded them since I was more concerned about getting away, while the demonic laughter roared in my ears. A number of words and phrases entered my awareness, including, "Grab her and guzzle the blood," thus saying, "Swallow the soul. Make her one with us." I began to believe I was going crazy at this point. I miraculously managed to open the door and was shortly running in my nightgown towards my car. I discovered that I was missing the keys after I arrived at the car. I tripped and fell to the ground before turning to face the cottage. I looked up, trembling and sobbing, to see a towering, menacing devil man staring menacingly in the face. He refused to cross the threshold for some reason, so I snuck around to the other side of the car and waited. It was early the following morning when I awoke. My teeth were chattering, and I was shivering. I carefully got to my feet and turned to face the cottage. The devil wasn't there anymore, but the door was still open. I scoped up the steps and looked inside the home despite the cold. The furniture had been broken and turned over. I dashed in as quickly as I could, picked up my bag and pocketbook, and then dashed out the door while keeping an eye on them. A hand gripped my hair as I crossed the doorway, and I heard a murky giggle coming from someplace in the cabin. I pushed onward because I didn't want to experience the same thing twice. Then, I felt a clump of hair being torn from my scalp. Without even bothering to get dressed, I hurried to the car and tossed my luggage inside. My neck started to bleed a little bit. Even though my wrath was reaching a fever pitch, it took me a long time to get the car started, and I wept loudly during the process. I pressed the throttle as soon as the car finally sped up and sped out of the cottage. I was perplexed to see that there was no blood on my neck when I reached around to feel for it. My scalp wasn't broken. I still don't know what occurred that day, but I'm certain I didn't dream about the terrible demon assault. They didn't take my soul or blood. As fate would have it, when an uncle passed away in my early 30s, I unluckily received a bad piece of property. Even while it may sound ungrateful, if you had seen it, you would have laughed with the rest of my family, because the property was in a forested region in the middle of nowhere. They taunted me endlessly with ghost stories. One weekend, I made the decision that I might as well go outside and have a look, but nobody was available to accompany me. Given that I departed on Friday afternoon with plans to return on Saturday, my mother was worried about me and had me swear to phone her every night, even though there was a self-contained cabin nearby. Since I drove a van, I chose to spend the night there. Unfortunately for me, I was informed that there was no running water, but I had already decided to clean up the property and sell it. Even if I only received a small profit, I had chills down my spine as I approached the driveway on the 4-acre property. I couldn't explain why that occurred, so I just disregarded it and kept driving. The trees were so dense that I thought I might get lost, but I soon came across the cabin, which in contrast to the run-down surroundings appeared to be too fresh. The shed, which was next to the cottage, was surrounded by a couple of old, abandoned automobiles and a haphazard pile of decaying wood. I could feel icicles coursing through my veins as I exited my automobile. I was certain I spotted a shadow in the woods, but it may have just been my anxiety. Despite feeling foolish, I called out hello. Naturally, there was nothing, and the shadow vanished. As I truly believed it may be a bear, I hurried to the front door and fumbled with the keys until I was able to open it and allow myself inside. Except for an old table and one chair, there was no furniture. It was clear that my uncle had begun improving the location before his passing. I wondered if his spirit may be residing at the cabin as I thought about him. I had no idea at the moment that the most terrifying events would take place outside. I began to consider leaving, but I ended up hauling my bags and air mattress inside. I ate a hastily prepared supper while sitting at the table and made notes in my head about what I needed to do to prepare the house for sale. Later, not far from the rear entrance, I heard a metallic sound. It sounded like a knife or axe being sharpened, though I couldn't be certain. It's true that I have an overactive imagination, but to me, the sound felt quite genuine. Most of the time, ghost stories don't frighten me at all. I initially saw nothing as I peered out the back window. Just after getting up to return to the table, I noticed something out of the corner of my left eye. As I turned around and saw what I initially saw to be a massive, monstrous shadow peering at me from the edge of the trees, I gasped. Why would there be a human out here in the middle of nowhere? It was too little to be a bear. I shifted to the window and took another look, but it had vanished. I could have kicked myself for forgetting to pack a weapon. I wasn't even carrying a multi-tool device. I had always been a tomboy, despite the fact that I am a female and was fairly rough at the time. I normally carried tools, but at that moment, all I had was a flashlight. I made the decision not to be bold, so I stayed in the cabin and journaled. I froze as I once again heard the metallic noise. I was certain that it was inside the cabin this time. I sprang up and whirled around apprehensively while shouting, "Who's there?" You better believe that when a shadow passed by the window, I leaped out of my skin. The unsettling issue was that I was unsure of whether the shadow had been outside or in front of the glass. I rushed up to the window in a fit of fright and saw a big shadow once more, this time closer to the cottage but still at the edge of the woods. I remained still, not blinking as I tried to determine if it was genuine. Even though it felt like hours had passed, I ultimately had to blink. The darkness vanished when I did. I honestly believed that a crazy man was watching me, so I made the decision to go. However, what if he was already waiting outside? As I heard something fall over in the adjacent room, I halted, running to the front door after gathering my belongings. Was he there? I had no way of knowing, and I was unwilling to learn. I flung open the door and ran to the car as quickly as I could. The instant the engine started, I was extremely appreciative. I think I could still make out a person's figure in the rearview mirror as I was leaving. But as I slowed down for one final glance, he or they had vanished. It might sound strange, but I really handed my dad the house. He hasn't had any problems there. They seem to like that these stories will leave you with more questions than answers. They are a reminder that sometimes the truth is much darker and more mysterious than we ever imagined. Join us next time on Scary Sagas for other spine-chilling true stories.